Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our special council meeting for November the 27th. I guess if we were going to give it a name other than a special council meeting, we'd call it a preliminary pre-budget meeting possibly, but we'll carry on. I've had an opportunity to have a preview of what we're going to get tonight, and I think it should be very educational and a learning experience for us all. So just before we get too far on here, I would like to thank our deputy mayor for filling in last week for me and did a good job. Everything worked out good. So we'll carry on. First item on the agenda is the confirmation of the agenda. Do we have a mover and seconder to confirm that? Moved by Councillor Felt, seconded by Councillor Duck. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. And does anybody have a conflict with interest in the agenda as it was sent out? You may find yourself as we get along tonight that there might be a case where you might have or not, and you declare it at that time. So the first item then under reports is the budget overview. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Wendy or Greg.
To me, Mr. Mayor.
To you. Okay. We turn it over to Greg. This is going to be a tag team show, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it is. So, Mayor and members of council. So Wendy and I will walk through some of these slides, and my recommendation would be is if you have a question as we're going along, just I'll nudge Mr. Mayor, and he can get you to ask your question. So instead of holding everything until the end, if you have a question, just bring them along. So this is this would be my first budget with this council, and what I'd like to do first of all is acknowledge that Wendy and her team have done a significant amount of work. And there should be some accolades that go to the Treasury and Finance Department, but as well, each of the department heads, and they're here this evening, they're the ones that have been feeding the information into Treasury, and so they've been very, very active over the last month, making sure that we could get to where we need to be. So we'll go to the next slide, Audrey, and I'm not sure who's clicking there. Is it? Oh, okay, there we are. Thank you, Wendy. So what we'll do is we'll do a bit of an update as far as objectives and as well an update about sort of where we're at. I want to have a little conversation about the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. So we'll try not to have as many acronyms here. We'll explain what the acronyms are. So the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund used to be referred to as the unconditional grants that we would get from the province every year. And so that's the most recent label that they've had on that particular funding. We want to talk about what's been happening with that, with the money that we receive from the province. We'll give you a bit of a snapshot, and then we'll have a conversation about the 2024 budget moving forward. So what we typically would like to do in the conversation with council is talk a little bit about our joint budget objectives, and there are a half a dozen objectives here that we would really like to try to espouse to. So what we're looking at doing here is establishing a sustainable core and base budget. And so what do we mean by base budget? So the base budget, so if we use 2023 as an example, there was a certain cost that associated with us delivering, and I would refer to it as a basket of services. So think about us going to the supermarket. We're going to put eggs and milk and a few other things in our basket. Well, for the municipality, the same thing happens, is that we do certain things. Some of those particular items and services are items that we're responsible for. There may be contract services that we get delivered by others. And then there's quite a number of services that we're told that we need to deliver. And we want to have a little bit of a conversation with council about discretionary and non-discretionary funding for those particular items within our budget that council has little or no control over. So we want to talk about this base and the base budget. And really, if you think about it, if it costs us X number of dollars to do things in 2023, how much is it going to cost us in 2024? So what is that X plus whatever that cost is going to be to deliver that same level of service to the public? So we also want to, as an objective, we want to establish fair market user fees. And so this council has already identified that there's an expectation that there will be the cost or CPI that's going to be assigned to our user fees that our user groups use. So whether that be rental of arena ice, ballparks, those types of things, and that we'll be talking a little bit about how do we make sure that our user fees don't decline and get below the cost of us delivering the service. This next point, maximizing leverage, is really, I think, is one of the most important philosophies that I think we should have as an organization. So if we put $1 in, it doesn't really matter what we put $1 into. We shouldn't be the only one putting money in. And so we try to lever as much money as we possibly can. So I can give you an example here. So under the Invest in Canada Infrastructure Project, or ICIP, if we are successful in getting money for our infrastructure, typically the federal government will pay up to 40% of that particular cost. The province pays 33.33%, and we pay the 26.7%. And so in that particular case, our dollar is leveraging $7.33. So as we go in, we should always try to look at how much we can leverage by the participation of the municipality, and certainly I think it's a good objective for us to have. And even down, if we start looking at things like community grants and that sort of type of thing, we're always asked to put money in, and we should try to ensure that we're trying to leverage as much money. So are we getting involved with nonprofit organizations for them to also apply for money, like the Ontario Trillium Fund and those types of things? So the next, so staffing, again, our objective is to maintain our adequate staffing levels. And so we want to make sure that we can retain and attract our qualified staff. And we've also already had a fairly significant conversation with council related to this year's budget and related to staffing. So how do we strategically plan for the future? So Wendy and her team and the senior managers are working on a 5 to 10 year capital budget, and we've already started to work with council to review reserve and reserve fund balances as well. And the sixth one is also extremely important. So if we start looking at a sustainable base budget, and we have the conversation with council about how much is needed from one year to the next to deliver that same level of service, then we're talking about the budget. We're not talking about a target, so an artificial target. And part of some councils will set an artificial target that says we should try to keep it in 2%, or we should try to keep it in 3%. We're going to take the approach, we're going to advise council, this is what the costs are for our base budget, and we'll have the debate about with council and amongst council about whether or not about how much that supplemental money is that we're looking for, and we'll give you some examples later on in the presentation. So as we go through here, we're going to talk about our base operating budget. as I mentioned, we're going to talk about supplemental budget requests. So what are these additional monies that is beyond what our base would be for the delivery of service? We'll do our capital budget. We'll do our 5 and 10-year forecast. And then we're hopeful, this is part of our optimism here, that we're hopeful that we'll be able to bring an operating and capital budget for council's approval by the end of January of 2024. And so we're gonna, that's our goal. That's where we're streaming and this towards that particular goal as we speak. So as we talked a little bit, as I've tried to explain around what's our core base budget level, this is the current level of service that's approved by council. It includes any base operating costs, any existing revenues at existing rates, and certainly it reflects the base budget approval that council would have approved from business plans during the past operating year. So if it costs us $1 or it costs us $100,000 to deliver a certain service, this year we may be talking about it may cost us $106,000 to deliver that particular service, and we'll have a conversation with council about the $6,000 that it costs us, and why does it cost us $6,000 additional dollars. The other thing that we're doing is, and this is, I have to give a lot of credit back to the managers and to Wendy and Monique and their staff. We do what's called budget maintenance. So we go through the budget continuously to look at the budget history of actual spending, right? So budgets are forecasts as far as dollars, but we take a look at it at systematic times of the year and bring that particular documentation to council. And we talk about what we're actual spending towards what that forecast or that budget was. And what we find on a consistent basis is that things may have changed throughout the course of when the budget was approved and throughout the year, and we might spend less than what we feel that we needed to spend, or something changed in the economy, or we may spend more. So for instance, some of the things that we're seeing now is pressures on fuel costs and utility costs as a part of our budget as they change because of inflation during the calendar year for us. And what impact does that have on our budget? So what Wendy and Monique and the staff have been going through is looking at, we're into our 4th quarter here of our budget, and looking at previous years to see those expenditure lines, and if we're over budgeting on a particular line, they'll go through and they'll trim it back, or they'll recommend to the department head that it gets trimmed back. And then so when we bring forward the next year's budget, you'll see an amendment to those particular items that require that budget maintenance. So that's a continuous thing that happens within financial service. Go to the next one. So as I mentioned around supplementary approach. So what we look at is any proposed change to existing levels of service or any proposed new programs. I think Councillor Harold, you'd asked me what a change in a program might be. So if we decide, for instance, that we want to do a curbside collection of organics is one thing, so it's a new program, then we have to budget for that particular program. That would be an example of us who would have a fairly significant hit. There may be some levels of service. When we talk about frequency, maybe a service like a curbside collection service is going to change in frequency from once a week to every 2 weeks or something of that. So we'll have a conversation based on our base budget about what are the changes, what are the levels of service that council has approved, because it's really important. The residents expect a certain level of service. They get comfortable with that level of service, and so we want to make sure that we can try to deliver that. Another example of level of service, might be under our minimum maintenance standards for snow plowing. Right now, we go out and we plow snow at a certain condition of so many centimeters of snow coming in, and so if we want to change that, then that would be a changed level of service. So the other thing too is that we may see revenue reductions that don't translate into cost reductions. So we're going to have a significant conversation about the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. That's an example of revenue reductions that we've been seeing that have been really significant to the municipality here for the last 10 years. So as we go into the supplementary approach, we're going to look at our budget, the majority of our budget issues corporately. And so we'll look at things like our labor and benefit costs. We'll look at it from a corporate perspective. How much does it cost us to staff the organization? We'll look at effects of inflation on contracted items. So examples of contracted items are going to be things like curbside collection from as far as garbage is an example. We've seen challenges with utilities. We'll talk a little bit, like we do every year, around general liability insurance. So that seems to be a bit of an animal for us. Fuel costs, and then other things related to policing, conservation authorities, and the requests from the library. We're going to see some of these larger particular areas where council may have some discretion, but in a lot of the cases, the discretion is limited. So those particular increases are usually outside of the council's purview. So and I've talked a little bit about this. We have two different types of supplementary requests. One of the items is increases to the base budget, right? So it's going to be there, and then it's going to stay in that base budget for year after year. So an example of that could be wages. So you can't, once we put money into staffing and wages, it stays in the staffing and wages, and you can't, take it out the next year. But there may be some other items which we look at, which is the second type, which is for a new one-time only service where we're going to provide some funding to that, and it may not occur in the next year. And so we look at it, and this is where the budget maintenance piece comes in, is we make sure that we mark it so that if there's an increase in your operating budget, then it's a one-time only, that we manage to take that particular increase out of our operating budget going forward. So this is a few of our initial observations about the 2024 budget. One of the things that we're going to have a conversation with you in greater detail is this Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund and the transfers to us. So what is happening right now is that money comes into the operating budget, and we'll show you the decline. So at one time in around 2014 or so, the municipality was receiving $3 million a year from OMPF. And so that goes right into your operating budget and right into your bottom line. So right in 2024, it is that particular contribution is now down to about $900,000. So what the effect has been on our budgets here is that you have to make up that money somewhere, because it's already into your operating budget. And so it's already baked into the cake. So what's been happening is that we've been using assessment growth money to pay for that loss of unconditional grants coming from the province. So it's been a huge hole. So if you look at that difference, that's been since about the 2014, 2015, it's had a $2 million operating hit on the municipality. Now, if you look at that in the context of what does that mean related to for each 1% of assessment equals about $100,000 in tax revenue, it's a 30%, it's a 20 to 30% hit that had to be made up from the property tax owners. And so what the conversations I've had in other councils and other municipalities is, how do you do that replacement so that the money that comes in from OMPF goes into reserve, and then you take it out of reserve to fund your operating budget rather than it going directly into your operating budget where you have a hole. And so I want to we'll have a little bit of a conversation about that. So we also want to talk about life cycle budgeting approach. So putting a certain amount of money into and classifying it into certain areas, roads, recreation, and putting a certain amount in. That money goes into a road reserve or a recreation reserve, and it increases and compounds year after year, and using some of your assessment dollars that you would get from growth. So that way we're trying to fund our asset management plan. And I can say to you with some concern is that based on we're required to have an asset management plan in our lifetime around this particular council table, we will not fully fund what our requirements are for infrastructure. It's just from the property taxpayer. It's just not sustainable. But we do have to show it. We have to show what was required for us to be able to make those commitments to try and hit our infrastructure deficit. But it's a really uphill climb, and not too many municipalities win lotteries. And so we have to figure out how we sort of do that and create some of the life cycle budgeting approach for asset management. So the other initial observations is that the capital program, again, is dependent on transfers from operating and reserves. And again, to reiterate it, it's unsustainable in the long term. We're going to do our best to try and to fund some of our infrastructure requirements, but you'll hear it was some disdain from the staff that it's just something that is that it's just not sustainable for us to continue to do. But that is the situation that we're in. So we need to be able to figure out how we're going to pay for a smaller bridged infrastructure investment. So we'll have an opportunity with some development charges and our updated development charges background study that we're going to get. That's in the process of being developed by Watson and Associates. And that money coming from growth, from the development of growth, paying for growth, we should be able to in the future, garner some income to help us pay for our infrastructure requirements. So I'm going to turn it over to Wendy, and she's going to. So what we tried to do is sort of say, well, that's a bit of the observations. This is what it means in real dollars. So to give you some examples in the real dollar. So Wendy, and you want to go ahead?
So this is just a 2021 snapshot of what the budget looked like. So our approved operating budget was around 16 million, and our approved capital investment was 8.6 million, and then the approved levy was 8.7 million. 2021 we saw assessment growth around 103, and we approved a transfer of 654,000 into reserves. And then that tax rate was actually a negative 0.12%, and the total 2021 total expenditures was 31 million, and that 31 million includes your requisition to the county and the school boards. If it seems high, those are in there. And then 2022 snapshot, we have an approved operating budget at 15 million, approved capital at 12 million, approved levy at 9 million. The assessment growth was 113,000, and then this year we withdrew 4 million out of the reserves. And then we had a 3.6% tax rate increase and a total expenditures of $34 million. And then last year or this year, we had an operating budget for 2023 of 16.8 million, approved capital at 4.8 million, approved a levy at 10 million. We did see a significant growth in 2023 at 235,000, and then approved reserves at 613. And then we had a tax rate increase of 8.46% and total expenditures at 29 million, almost 30. And then we're going to do the same for capital. So capital in 2021 again was the 8.6. The levy was 4.9 for that capital budget. Reserve transfers were 300,000, and we received 1.7 in grants. For 2022, capital investment was $12 million, and to help fund that 12 million, we used 1.5 in levy. We had 2.9 million in reserve transfers and 2.9 million in senior grants.
Mayor McKenzie, I was wondering, Wendy, could you explain, you just gave us a snapshot of 2021 as an example, where 2021 budget snapshot had approved reserves of 600,000, but yet the couple slides later, the 2021 capital budget snapshot, reserve transfer of 300,000. What's the difference between those two lines?
Probably a contribution to the operations. So it could be like building, for example, if they contributed, it would go the other way, or water, wastewater is probably going the other way. So it's just looking at kind of what the total is. So in the operating, that is I would say on the 2021 budget snapshot, that's a net number. But since I don't have my laptop and I can't double check that number, I could get back to you, but I'm pretty sure that's how that was structured. And then the capital is just capital fund transfers. So like if for the 2021, I would say in 2022, like that number is significantly higher, but it's probably paying for this building or paid for the fire hall or the bridge. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I think I was at 2022 capital. Here we had, oh no, I was 23. So in 2023, we had approved capital at 4.8 million. So that was our investment into the capital infrastructure. The approved levy portion of capital was 752,000, and the reserve transfer was 463, and senior government grants was 2.4.
Would you like me to speak to these, Wendy? So this is what I alluded to at the beginning of our remarks. So when we get involved in the budget, and there's the actual budget presentation and the debate by council, we need to be we need to give some understanding to just exactly what decisions that council has solely to make out of our operating and capital budgets. So you'll see here a list of non-discretionary and discretionary types of expenditures that council's faced with. So under the non-discretionary, we have to pay for police. And you'll see that, you know, our police budget is about 1.6 million. We can't be lawless. We can't have a bunch of renegades out there. We have to, under the Police Services Act, we have to have a police service. We have salary and benefits of staff. So we we can determine, you know, our COLA and rates of pay, but we have to have people to deliver the services. And so the salaries and benefits, and to give you an idea for what we talked about in 2023, that's about $5 million. And we're going to go through some of these items and we're going to show you how they actually all add up or don't add up. We have to have general liability insurance. And this has been just an animal lately. It's been going up. If we can get a general liability policy renewal and it's less than 20% per year, we've been done really well. We also have conservation authorities. There's separate boards that we have to pay the levy. We have to pay, you know, curbside collection through blue water recycling. And as well, the library board is a separate entity. And so we pay the cost of the library, and those costs are determined and approved by the library board. And this is just an example of some of the items that are they're not discretionary for council, and they add up to significant amounts of money. So where council may decide is, as I talked about earlier, is about maintenance, right? So we do have some requirements under the minimum maintenance standards, you know, for winter control and those sort of types of things. But again, with that comes the, you know, so you can set what that level is, how many kilometers of sidewalk we're going to plow, and those types of things. Fire services, and I see the fire chief's here with us as well. So under the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, council sets the level of service for police or for fire services in the community, and then the cost is borne by the municipality. So how many volunteers, how many stations, that sort of type of stuff goes into the council passed bylaw, and it's the fire services bylaw. Council composition, that's also an item that council can determine. Size and nature of council and the costs related to council. Another area for discretionary spending is in recreation. You can choose to spend on recreation, or you can choose not to spend on recreation, and a variety of different levels. Do you want arenas? Do you want pools? Do you want sports fields? Do you want those sort of types of things? And so council can decide to make those decisions. So what we're going to see here as we go through our budget process, that about 95% of our operating budget is going to fall into that non-discretion council must pay. So we're going to be debating over a small amount of shekels in the sock that every year about what are the discretionary pieces. I'm going to go through this.
So here's a list of what the in 2023, kind of what our operating budget was and how much the impact on the levy was from the operations. And then we're going to go through kind of the non-discretionary items and then take a look at what that total is in comparison, and then look at what each kind of grouping has the impacts of the budget, less any items above the line. So in 2023, the operating budget was 16 million, and of that was 9.42 million of the levy. Salaries made up that of $5 million. OPP contract was 1.6 million. Library was 388,000. Conservation Authority was 276. Insurance was 406. And then curbside waste was 135. So the total non-discretionary items was $7.8 million. Then we subtracted our OMPF funding. So that leaves you with 6.9 million. And then the items below here are what we're saying are the discretionary items in each of the departments, less all of the items above. So if there was insurance or wages, it's off of the number below. So general government, so that's being CEO, clerk, and finance, 802. Protective services, which is police and fire, 934. Transportation, 2.6 million. environmental services, not including wastewater and water, 734. Health services, 64,000, so that's cemeteries. Recreation services, 940,000. Planning and development, 482. That gets you down to $13 million. Then there's self-funded expenses, which are your water, wastewater, and building department, and they make up 3.3 million. That's how we got it to balance to your total operating expenses of 6.8 million. So this slide is to help demonstrate that there's quite a bit that is non-discretionary in the total of the 16 million. Any questions on that slide?
You mentioned OPP contract above the line and then protective services below the line. Would a certain portion of the OPP contract be below the line? Is that what you're meaning? Like, say, if I get my terminology right, a contract for 5.1 is above the line, but 8.1 would be below the line because it's optional? Is that, am I getting my terminology correct on OPP contracts?
So the OPP contract itself is 1.6 million, but the protective services down below is your fire department, the police services board, and by-law is in that category.
So if I may, then I guess a certain portion of the OPP contract would be discretionary, whether we choose a certain contract with them, whether we have an inspector in town. If somebody can help me with my terminology.
Sure, I can comment on that, Councillor Vink. The level of service for OPP is based on households and based on calls for service. So that's what determines the number of staff that are making services to your community, and that's provided to us by OPP. So the Police Services Board hears regularly at their meetings about what their calls for service are and those things. So we get I guess I would refer to it as a statement at the beginning and at the end of the calendar year. So the statement comes to us, and we have it for 2024, which is going to be their billing statement. This is how much they're going to bill us, and this is how it's the composition of that billing based on their staffing needs and requirements for both sworn and civilian officers. The cost of the Police Services Board is borne by the Police Services Board itself, meeting honorariums, travel, those types of things, and the Police Services Board passes their recommended budget that comes to council. But the 1.6 million that comes to us, it's a non-negotiable thing. That's what we get every year, would be that. So there's a there's a contract services that you can get, which is based on calls for service, and that includes the Police Services Board. The 5.1 is a different one, which is just a contract for service. And typically, I believe, Councillor Harold, I believe with a 5.1, there's not a Police Services Board, or there's a combined board. It's been a while since I've dealt with a community with a 5.1.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there is no board.
Right. So in that particular case, there are very few. The OPPs were moving away from 5.1, and the reason that they've been moving away from 5.1 is if you have a significant event in your community, you get charged for the significant event, right? So let's say you have a murder or you have some sort of cataclysmic event in your community, then the municipality would be on the hook for all of the services for that particular item under a 5.1. Whereas under a contract, that's your contract, you deliver the services, and if something happens, then the resources come from the remainder of the outside specialty requirements for OP.
I think a prime example of that be a couple of years ago when we had that drowning in the pile of resources that poured into our fire hall to help us cope and deal with that. So that's the difference. And I don't know whether you want to elaborate a little bit more where we're heading in the future with OPP.
So there's been a change to the Police Services Act. Regulations have just come through. And what would happen is that each municipality that was in a contract for services for OPP had a police services board for that municipality, or those, you could have multiple municipalities together delivering the service, and they would have a police service board for that contract. What's happening and coming forward in 2024 is that they're going to be going to a detachment by detachment board. So in our particular case, there are multiple municipalities that had singular contracts. We'll be governed by one board that will cover our detachment patrol area. And so there's been an ongoing collaboration and negotiation that's been happening amongst communities over the last 2 years to get ready for that particular thing. And so they had to put in proposals to the Ministry of the Solicitor General for proposed composition of boards for each service area. And so we'll be in a combined service area with a couple of other neighboring communities that are served by the detachment for our area for Perth. So there'll be some changes that are come forward. They've given us the billing for 2024 for that, so that's what they're going to base their billing on. But for 2025, we'll have a different billing methodology, I guess. And I know that I'm going to be on a conference call here in the next couple of weeks with the Solicitor General, talking about how they're going to approach their new billing for the 2025 service here.
So on this slide, it just kind of just shows where we've gone from 2017 in our OMPF or Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund to today. So you can see back in 2017, we were getting $533 per household, and now we're only getting $266 per household. So significant drop. Although this year, the last 2 years, we've seen an increase. So this year we get an extra 8,900 to the budget. And so, but this slide is to show how much we've actually lost in the last number of years.
And the point really of showing that is that money has been made up, that tax money that has to go into our operating budget has been made up by the taxpayers to pay the municipal operating budget, because the money is not coming in anymore. And so we wanted to make sure that council was aware of that, and the precarious position that we have, even at 900, let's say $1 million. They're in the process of phasing this money out, and they'd like to get out of this particular business altogether, as far as these conditional grants from the provincial government. So if this was to go away tomorrow, the hit on our operating budget would be 10%, just to maintain what we currently have as far as revenue coming into the organization. So this is what we're talking about. I think the next slide, Wendy, we want to introduce to you sort of this, how do we deal with this income replacement? And the income replacement would be transfer some of our gross money from assessment that would go into our operating budget. So let's say we decide we're going to do $100,000. We would transfer that money into our operating budget, and $100,000 from OMPF would go into reserve. So when you get to a point after a certain number of years, you're covering your whole OMPF liability, so that if they do cut off in the next 5 years, OMPF then the only thing that gets hurt is your reserve and not your continuous operating budget. So I've had to deal with this in the last 5 municipalities that I've dealt with, about how do you come up with a strategy in order for the municipality to mitigate as much potential damage in the future as possible.
Got a question from Councillor Foster.
Prior to 2017, did it stay relatively the same before then, or did it fluctuate wildly even before that?
So I know, Wendy, you don't have your laptop, but I think going back to 2014, 2015, this used to be $3 million. Pardon me? Almost 4 million.
Okay. Deputy
Yeah, it's further to the CAO's comments. This has been the OMPF cuts have been an ongoing thing, and the senior members of council, including the mayor, can verify that this has always been an issue that we've had to deal with on an annual basis.
And really what we wanted to do is just make council aware that these are some of the challenges that these are the, when we start having a conversation about what are some of the wicked problems we have, this is one of the wicked problems that we have from an operating funding perspective for the municipality. So what we're going to do is you're going to see here as we get into the operating budget, we are going to make a couple of recommendations about how we might do this income replacement strategy and see how we can sort of manage this in a proactive way. I spoke about this a little bit before about life cycle contributions with respect to certain areas, and typically you would do life cycle contributions for roads and recreation and those items. So it's a similar type of approach to the OMPF, but again, this is the concept about growth paying for growth. So if we get assessment dollars that are coming in that are attributed to growth, then what we should be thinking about doing is putting some monies aside and setting up a life cycle reserve. And we're recommending, initially maybe roads and recreation, and start it out and make a contribution and try to make a contribution every year. So, and increase it by the same amount every year. So if you start out with maybe 100 and then you go to 200 or whatever, so by the end of 5 years, you come close to be, contributing close to $1 million at that particular around compounding. And it makes a big difference when we are looking at our infrastructure and, just doing one repair to a bridge will eat up that particular, those particular dollars in a heartbeat. And so we're again, trying to be proactive, look at life cycle contributions and how we're going to be able to approach our asset management plan to try to curb our infrastructure deficit. We're never going to eliminate it, but we're going to try and curb. You want to do that?
This particular slide, basically, we're going to look at different key performance items. So when we looked at the supplementary items, we're going to pull them out for 2024 and show you what they look like. And so going forward, we'll kind of have that same feel. So you'll know the supplementary increases to items like our contracts, salary and wages, insurance, and then it'll help make a strategy going forward, again, with the split in growth to being kind of paying for the OMPF and then building reserve for life cycle replacement. And so here's a snapshot for the 2023 supplementary changes. So So again, our budget was 16.8 million in operations and 9.4 in levy. And of our supplementary changes, so that's from 2022 to 2023, we saw a total supplementary change of 500,000. And this made up of this list. And again, it's salary and wages, OPP, library, conservation authority, insurance. That year we had an increase in OMPF. Assessment increase of 235. We saw a decrease in recreational revenue, decrease in utilities, and we upped our fuel just because the fuel prices were sitting around $202 a liter. So last year, from 2022 to 2023, 500,000 made up of your supplementary changes. So in 2024, we're going to try and do the same, so you can kind of see where, kind of at a corporate level, where these changes are. So some of the costs we do have in, we're almost finalizing the salary and benefit item, but OPP, the contract from 2023 to 2024, we're seeing an increase of $77,000. Library is seeing an increase of 14,000. Conservation Authority, 35,000. Insurance, we know it's been confirmed verbally, that's 11% increase, so $48,000. There's our OMPF increase. And then going down, we're still working on to be determined values. But as we kind of know these numbers, this slide deck will be updated and presented to council. So then you'll see what your annual supplementary changes will be from year to year.
So what we'll be able to do is break this down again and sort of say, here's what our draft increase in dollars is for operating. So once we, in 2023, it was that $500,000. You'll see a number here when we start to go through the process, and once some of these other numbers become available, and you'll say, here's what here's our draft supplemental amount that we're asking, or that we're looking at and engaging council on. We'll talk a little bit about what our 2024 assessment will be. We're hopeful that we'll hit an assessment value similar to what was in 2023. It was a good year. And then what we're going to do is we're going to separate the two items, which is, again, this is the discretionary, non-discretionary. So we're looking at transfer to others. Like, who do we write checks to? And on a continuous basis, and that council has little control over, and those are the insurance, library, OMPF insurance, and policing, and those sort of types of things. And then give you a little bit of a sense of how much of those particular dollars are for municipal purposes. And I think you'll be shocked to see how little the money is for municipal purposes compared to those contributions to others, just to get a sense. And our hope is that as we move forward, we're going to give you some information, and I know we're going to get into the Christmas social season here pretty soon. It gives you a bit of an elevator speech when you're out at at cocktail parties and everything, and say, geez, things are going through the roof. You'd be able to say, well, our total operating increased by X number of dollars, but for municipal purposes, it was only X, right? And so, and becomes an education for council, but it also becomes an education for the public as well. So that's what our goal is here, to do those things. So here's our next steps. I think this is pretty much our last slide, is it not? And before we get to questions. So here we are. And so we're looking to, we had hoped to potentially come before council on the 4th of December. We're gonna respectfully ask council for us just to go to December the 11th. Gives us another week of preparation time. So we would do December 11th and January 22nd. So December the 11th, we come and have a conversation about operating. January 22nd, we may have another meeting sometime in January as well to deal with capital. So December 11th operating, January 22nd capital. We're still going to try and get to council for the 29th to pass the budget bylaw for municipal purposes only. So the county budget may not be fully done and the school board budget may be done, but we can still pass our bylaw for municipal purposes. And then pass the combined bylaw for our full tax rate sometime in March and April when those things come along. I just want to go back one. So the water sewer rates have already been approved by council, so we can start to do the 2024 billing for water sewer, and it's based on our water our water financial plan, water and sewer financial plan. So we can start to do those pieces of the budget already. So here we are. This is we talked a little bit about these particular items and draft operating with supplemental requests for December the 11th, and then the capital on the 22nd, and away we go. So it's the timing. So I think we might have to do a housekeeping amendment because we had asked at the last meeting that council approve a council meeting for the 4th of December. I'll leave that to the clerk and to the mayor. And if there's any questions of council, I'd be pleased to answer any of those.
Okay, we've been sitting here for about an hour and got a lot of information here. So just before we go into questions, I'm going to say we take a 5-minute break, have a stretch. If you want to grab a drink, whatever, and then we'll come back and we'll deal with the questions. If you got something in your mind, by all means, don't lose it, write it down, keep it up here, and we'll go from there. So 5 minutes. Okay, we're back from the break. We had left with the information and come back for questions. So I hope everybody remembers what they were going to ask, made note of it. So who wants to be first? Councillor Phelps?
Just a comment first. I'd like to thank Greg and the staff. This was really helpful as a new counselor and made things a little clearer. Just a comment, the decline in the OMPF is what we see, but some of the other stuff that they download provincially, like the conservation stuff that we're paying for, but it really doesn't show in our budget because it's in the non-discretionary stuff, is also a cost to the municipality that we're paying on top of what we're losing on the other one. And just a quick question, the user pay on slide 24, the 2%, is that actually a factual number? Is that an estimate? Have we ever done a study on the amount of ice time being, like ice time is just an example, ice time being used versus what we're costs versus what we're getting from user fees, or same as ball diamonds, like the lights, the staffing, hall rental for cleaning, you know, the hall here, if you rent it out for 4 hours and we're paying someone $24 to clean it, it's an hour to clean it plus utilities is $40. Like it just, some of that stuff, has it ever been actually looked at? Are we recouping what we're spending on some of those things?
So I would say in a broad form, no, we haven't done a full-on study to see that. Some of that will come out in the rec master plan with the solution that Monteith Brown provided. We do small amounts. We look at a day of ice time and how much we use and how much isn't used and how much is brought back. Ultimately, the arena does lose money, as we see in the thing, and we can't really budget to make money or break even, but there is a loss, and we try to mitigate that as best we can. But I think we will get a little bit better numbers after the rec master plan is complete.
Thanks, Darius.
Just Councillor Phelps, one of the things is that number should read user fees at 5.63%. I think that's what we had been looking at, and that was council's direction about adding CPI at 5.63%. So that's an error on the slide. It should be 5.63%.
When we look at the liability insurance, do they break that out also for sports? Do they break it out for events? Do they break it out for whatever? Yeah.
They do, and so typically we take the premium and we apply it to each building. But this year, because we don't have that quite yet, and then we only have a verbal, what we've done is added 11% across every piece. So with Ketterson coming on, I'm not sure where that 11% all fits. And so the budget itself will have the right amount, that might not all be in the right buckets. We don't have that document yet.
Other questions? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks, Wendy and Greg, for an excellent presentation, and staff for their support to get us to this point. Wendy, you mentioned the development charges study. Can you give us a refresher on the timetable on when that study will bring us information on the proposed changes to development charges, please?
So I believe the development charges bylaw expires in September of 2024, and we have to do 60-day notification before changing those. So I think it's scheduled for late spring to come, and we're currently working on the growth numbers, and we have a prescribed list of items to kind of work through. So we're kind of chewing out some numbers right now.
Councillor Foster?
Mine's about the schedule, so that we won't have a meeting on the 4th at all anymore. It'll now just be it'll be removed and just postponed. We won't have a regular meeting.
That's right.
Okay.
And we were going to bring that up at the end of the meeting, but you always ahead of the game.
Mayor McKenzie, We talked lots about life cycle replacement costs of assets in this plan. When do we, or how do we get to a point where we decide on the asset management plan, whether it should be, to one extreme, fully funded with the reserves, or to the other extreme, pay as you go? How do we get to that point, figuring out that balance, or if it should be at one way or the other?
Who wants to field that one? Wendy, go ahead. All right, sure.
Sure, I'll give a stab at it. So the regulation says we have to have a new asset management plan coming here in 2025. So we'll be working on it in 2024. And probably during those discussions, probably come to council with some recommendations as to kind of where you would like. I think Hempson did the last one. And in their recommendation, there was to look at the deficit, and those recommendations we just kind of did going forward, just status quo. There was no increase to capital levy at that time. And I think as we've brought on an asset management technical analyst, I think our asset data has improved significantly. And I think from that, we are definitely being able to look at life cycle, and we'll be able to present different options that we see in our assets, and kind of to make improvements or what we see or what a standard is. There's lots of different methodologies in looking at life cycle. You can just take, I'll use vehicles because they're an easy example. You can just say your useful life's 10 years. You can have a policy where you use them right to 15 years and then replace them, or you can replace them halfway when there's equity. And so there's a lot of different strategies. So there's not just one and you're done. And I don't think each asset group should be applied the same way. Different ones have different repercussions. And so we can look at risk. So I'm going to use a bridge, for example. The bridge downtown, it's a higher risk than a bridge that maybe 5 people use. And so there might be things in place that we would put to counter some of that life cycle requirement. So it may say that the bridge is due to be replaced, but because there's only 5 people crossing the bridge, it can go well beyond its useful life. But the bridge downtown, it's high risk, high use, and probably needs to be maintained, and more urgency on funding and keeping its funds available. So the asset management plan should dictate all that. And along the process, we'll definitely be bringing strategies and getting council's input. Does that help answer your question?
Just, we'll be bringing that forward, but I guess from council's perspective is, and as I iterated at the beginning of my conversation with council, is I don't think we'll ever get out of the deficit. So you'll see what our requirements are going to be in order to replace those assets, and what our capabilities are to do it. And then we'll give you the numbers that say, well, we should be doing a capital levy to replace this, and it should be X number of dollars per year. And you'll quickly see that X number of dollars per year, we could never raise that money from the individual taxpayer, because it would just be some monumental value. But we'll give you what the value is, so you get a sense of what that is.
Anybody else? Deputy Mayor again?
A question for either Wendy or Mike. What's the status on the connecting link funding from Ministry of Transportation? Is that programming still available in its current level of funding? Is there any potential for that funding to be taken away by the province anytime soon?
I believe the MTO still has the grant out there. They made a 7-year commitment. I think they're in year 6 or 5 right now. And probably, it will be, continuing on. Just that West Perth right now has no eligible projects just because we were quite successful. 6 grants within the first 7 years of it when it first came out. So they're just, rounding that funding and grants, shortly here.
Anybody else? Everybody is just right up to speed now. Deputy Mayor again?
Thanks, Your Worship. I guess this is more of a comment than a question. It goes back to, I guess it's the third slide. The CAO mentioned about West Perth budget objectives. And somewhere I wrote priorities with a question mark. And the comment is, we made an application for a RED grant, Rural Economic Development Grant. And it was a curious application. But it was geared towards recreation. I have no problem with recreation. It's important. But we have so many other priorities in the municipality, and we've heard different presentations. Perth Care for Kids, they need workers, they need for workers, a need for training. That's a common issue throughout the municipality and the region for employers. So I guess my comment is, hopefully in the future, that when we make a RED grant application or other similar type of applications to maximize the leverage that the CAO mentioned, that we can make a more focused attempt in our grant applications. Like, it's great to have trails and amenities and that sort of thing, but if we're not able to bring the people here to satisfy the needs of the employers in the community, then having a great trail is lost because there's no one here to enjoy it. So I just hopefully through this exercise, we're able to have a more focused approach on our grant applications in the future. That was my comment. Thanks.
Okay. Any comments or input from staff? Everybody's in the same boat here. Okay, I don't wanna flog this to death here. I know you've had a lot of information here tonight, so we do have a recommendation that if there's nothing further, that we receive the 2024 budget overview information report. Do you have a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Duck, Councillor Rose. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Okay, under budget dates, and I think Greg kind of went through that a little bit in his presentation, and it ties into what Councillor Foster was saying. So we're doing away with the December 4th meeting altogether, and we're going to have the change that meeting to the 11th. So it'll be 1 week later, and it'll be a special council meeting to deal with the operating budget. And then the 18th will be our regular council meeting, and that'll be the last one before Christmas. We do have a resolution here, and I guess we could deal with that one right now. So the recommendation is that the Council of Municipality of West Perth amend the 2023 council meeting schedule to remove December 4th regular council meeting and change the December 11th, 2023 to a special council meeting operating budget, and that council amend the 2024 council meeting schedule to include January the 22nd, a special council meeting for capital budget. So we got those dates. Do we have a mover and seconder for that motion then? Councillor Phelps, seconded by Councillor Harold. Any discussion or questions with regards to that? Councillor Vink?
Just to make sure there's no planning issues that would need to be addressed in that 4-week period. that we wouldn't be sitting as a regular council then?
We've already worked with the county, so changing the 4th isn't changing anything because it was a special meeting that we had initially. So we're moving that is fine. And then from a January standpoint, a little far away for me to predetermine that at this point. Based on when the applications are deemed complete.
Deputy Mayor?
January 22nd. That's AMO is on,
Oh,
or Roma, sorry.
Roma's on
I'm
that.
getting my conferences names mixed up, but Roma is on the 22nd. I don't know.
So who is going to Roma? And I know I am as well. So we'll maybe have to tweak that. Stay tuned, I guess. We'll just disregard that last half of the motion, I guess, for now. Wendy, go
Could
ahead.
we move it to the first meeting then in January?
Yeah. I've got a calendar in front of me here.
Is that the first, January 8th? Is that the first Monday?
January the 4th. No, that's December. Sorry, January. Yeah, we're not gonna meet in the first, so it'd be the 8th.
Is that a regular council meeting?
What do you wish to do?
Thank you, Audrey. Yeah, so our first meeting in January was the 15th. So that's the schedule as it sits right now. So if we want to go to the 15th, does that work for you, Wendy? I think we're basing this off your timelines.
I would say either make the 15th a special meeting or add another meeting on the 8th as a special meeting.
Will there be enough regular council business to have the meeting on the 8th? Because I guess I'm addressing that one maybe to Dan. You know, what's coming up?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right.
It is a spread. We can always report back to council on the 18th if we think the agenda is getting busy and add the 8th. But for now, we can leave it.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I would suggest that we just leave it and we can bring on the 18th, we'll bring a date
Okay.
for January. And that way, if we have to go midweek or something like that for a special council meeting, we'll have a chance to canvass members of council as well.
Yep. Okay. All right. So movers and seconder, it was Councilor Feltz and Councilor Harold. So we'll just eliminate that last half of that motion. So it'll be that we amend the 2023 council meeting schedule to remove December 4th and change the December 11th to a special council meeting for operating budget. And if we do have some item that has to be dealt with, we can always deal with it at that time. So you're okay with that? Moved and seconded. I think we even voted on it, didn't we? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Okay. The other item that I wanted to have a brief discussion about, and we can do this right after council if you wish, and that's with regards to the parade and the float. And I think we need to have a bit of a discussion as to what we're doing and when we're doing it and pick a night, but we don't have to take up our formal time here. We can do that just after we adjourn, so wish. I have nothing else other than confirmatory bylaw. And that is that bylaw 69 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of Corporation Municipality of West Perth. We read a first and second time this 27th day of November. Mover and seconder for that. Councillor Duck, Councillor Rose, all those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. And then that bylaw 69 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of West Perth be